Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the continuing family and community education program here at the Recovery Bank. My name is Frank Bollock. I'm the project manager here at the Recovery Bank. We've been really fortunate over the last 3 weeks to have John Knowles from Brookdale talking to us about the family disease. And tonight's the fourth installment of a 4-week series. We are going to continue with our educational program, starting with Tom Smith on April 8th. He's a psychologist who is a member of the board of Treatment Court Advocacy Center and a clinical psychologist here in Scranton, formerly at the University of Scranton. And then on April 15th, Dr. Karen Arscott from Geisinger Marworth will talk about the disease of addiction and multiple pathways to recovery. And we're going to try to continue going on Thursday evenings at 6 o'clock for the next several months. But again, tonight we're fortunate. Brookdale is a fabulous supporter of the Recovery Bank, and John is a member of our steering committee and very knowledgeable regarding alcoholism and family disease, and is going to talk about a topic near and dear to my heart tonight, the King Baby Syndrome. So without any further ado, John Knowles. Thanks, John.
Thanks, Frank. So I'd like to welcome everybody. This has been fun here because we have been able to kind of do this in multi levels, or I don't know, what do you say, it wouldn't be multi-level marketing, but we're presenting. We have both people in person here, and we have folks on Zoom, and we have a Facebook Live feed going also. So the whole idea is to be able to pull up as many opportunities to get the message out to people and to talk about the family disease. Myself, I've been involved in the treatment field since 1987, started out as a therapist, was a clinical director, have been an executive director, CEO of different facilities, currently serve as the executive director and senior business development director for Brookdale, which is a 110-bed facility located in Scott Run, Pennsylvania. It is just a dynamite program with some dynamite folks, very blessed. Kingsley Schwartz, who tells me what to do and keeps me in line, is our local representative here and does a wonderful job for us, and we're very blessed to have her. And if any of you guys would like a copy of this presentation, simply get in touch with us here, either at the Recovery Bank or talk with Kingsley, and we'll make sure that we get the slides out to you all 4 weeks. If there's anything that we can do to help you out, or if you have further questions, by all means, don't hesitate to give us a call. So tonight is our last of our series. We talked about originally, just to kind of recap where we're at, is we started out in week 1 where we talked about kind of the progression of addiction and the 3 things that really kind of drive families crazy, which is the blackouts, and the repressed thinking, and then the euphoric recall, those things that allow chemically dependent people to stay and focus and are able to function and carry on in late stage addiction. So, once we understand that point and how that develops the roles of the family, we talked early on about how people assume various roles because in order to cope and in order to function in that system, you need to assume certain roles, and the end result being codependency. And it's a coping mechanism for the insanity of addiction. And we always say that addiction includes the addict, but there are many other people and things within the system that are included also. And so when we talk about addiction, it's not simply focused on the individual who's consuming the substance, it's anybody that they touch. If you have a chemically dependent person in your family, you understand the insanity that goes on, the chaos and all of that. And one of the issues that we talk about in 2 and 3 is post-acute withdrawal and the potential for relapse, and how does that come about. And we talk about the signs and symptoms of that. And basically that addiction is a neurological disease, that it's a disease of the brain, and that it's really just an interruption in the central nervous system and through the brain circuits that don't allow people to think right. And so your thought processes and delusional thinking and all that start to take hold. In order to cope with that, the brain kind of tells you something different, then the emotions kick in, and people begin to operate on a basis of fear, and fear tends to hold them hostage, and the fear drives a lot of the decision-making that moves forward. And part of the fear is that I will be exposed. I'll be exposed for the things that I did, the things that I said. You know, we often say, hey, if we asked you to stand up and tell us your deep, dark secret right now, is that something you would be willing to do? And in most people's cases, no. And it's not because of how you view I will judge you. It's because you view that I will judge you as harshly as you've judged yourself, if that makes sense. That really it's that self-delusion that really takes hold, and that's the big part of what we get into. So how do we cope with that? Well, that's where we come to session 4, good intro, is the king baby, what we call the king baby and the queen baby syndrome. And, this is really something interesting. It's been around for a while, probably back in the 80s. A fellow came up with if you go onto the Hazelden website, you can get it. If you've been in treatment, they've always got them right there with the acceptance pamphlet and Father Martin's chalk talk or something. These are just things that really have been around for a long time and are really kind of pertinent to what we do. So what we know about addiction is that, there's a great term. It's a selfishness, self-centeredness that we think is the root of our troubles. And I once heard a fellow once say, that sounds like an answer to me, that if you're looking for what is addiction. But driven by 100 forms of fear and self-delusion, self-seeking, self-pity, we engage in behaviors that offend others, and they act out. And we can't figure out why. Like, I'm being a good guy here, and why are these people acting? And inevitably, when we go back and we look at our history, the history says that we've made decisions based on self, which later placed us in a position to be hurt. That most of my motives and most of my interactions and most of my actions and behaviors are decisions made to benefit me, and there's a certain level of selfishness and self-centeredness that takes hold. It's I'm blessed to be married for 40 years. I'm married to a wonderful woman. My first attraction to her was selfish. I found her to be attractive, and I wanted to talk with this gal, and so my motives were not maybe as sincere as they are today, but sometimes in business there's an opportunity to do business, and so that's what you may have a motive that's less than sincere, but a lot of that is based on what's in it for me. How am I going to benefit from this? And as you start to go back and take a look at your relationships, you begin to see that maybe a lot of this stuff falls into that selfishness and self-centeredness. There's a payoff, or there's a benefit in that for me. And what happens is the whole chemical dependency thing is there's a ton of pleasure seeking involved here. That we really want to, the feel-good stuff is what it's all about. If you go back to what we talked about, when we talked about the brain, the parts of the brain that get stimulated, and give you that aha feeling, that woohoo, the brain doesn't know any different. The brain says to you, Johnny, that white stuff that you snorted all last week, there it is on the table. Last time we did that, we felt really good. Last time we drank those drinks, we felt really good. Whatever those things. If you have what they call process disorders, gambling and sex and internet and all those other things, those things kick off the same centers of the brain. And so, maybe you see a slot machine, you get all excited. You see a naked person, you get all excited. Because your brain says, whoa, that's the stuff that made us feel good. That's the feel-good stuff. That's what's going in there. And so what happens is addiction is kind of that unconscious run wild, that conscious or unconscious selfishness run wild, where the whole attention-seeking, pleasure-seeking, power-seeking thing really becomes the primary focus of most of what we do. And so this is where a lot of times you'll hear people talk about our addiction, our emotional growth stops at the start of our use. So that if you start using on a regular basis, say 14, 15, 16, 17, emotionally, your coping skills, communication skills, stress reduction skills, interpersonal skills will end at that time, because you then have the reliance on the substance to give you the relief or to cope, to get through that. So the immaturity that starts to come out gives us that, the king-queen piece of this is the selfishness and self-centeredness and look at me. The baby piece of this is that I've not matured enough on an emotional level. And, I've been in the treatment field for 35 years, and I treat a lot of 55-year-old juvenile delinquents, and I'm often one myself in terms of my actions and behaviors. So the immaturity is when we're talking about that, one of the hardest parts for chemically dependent people is to acknowledge that that's true. It's very hard to say I'm immature, and my level of immaturity, here's what it represents. So there's a couple different kinds of king, queen, baby type folks. And we see these people, quite often. And there's 7 or 8 different ones here. And the first one is the falsely humble person. And we all know that guy that, they're kind of very narcissistic in a sense, and we'll talk more about narcissism later. But they want you to believe that they're kind of, woe is me. I'm no good. I'm not doing any good. How can you love me? Look at me. Woe is me. Look what I've done. Yet if you talk to their family, or if you see their, it's they're like, oh, wait a minute, this isn't the guy we know. He's not feeling bad. He's not feeling down. He's not feeling depressed. He's not taking responsibility. So that false humility, and that's very common in early recovery, because there's a perception that we're supposed to be humble. I have no clue how to be humble, so I act humble, and I make some mistakes along the way. Ego tripper is the next one. These are the guys who are always looking for acknowledgement and praise from others. So that they do whatever they have to do to get. They equate praise with respect. That makes sense. If you're sitting in a meeting and people, I'll give you an example. I was watching today. I was in a meeting with some people, and they were going around, and they did this exercise where they had to acknowledge other folks. And I was talking to somebody afterwards, and they said, "So what'd you think of that meeting?" I said, "Well, the clinical guy in me was thinking, everybody's sitting there. Okay, who's going to say something nice about me?" And then when it got down to the end, and there were only 3 people left, it was like, uh-oh. What does this mean? Does this mean that they're not? So that whole ego thing, of focusing on praise. And these guys are very much bullies. These are they enjoy controlled tension, and they tend to bully people a lot, in very subtle ways. But they will move very aggressively to get their agenda done. And they spend a lot of time putting people down. And they will it usually starts out subtle. They get the sense that you're buying in, and then, let me tell you about Joe. You know about him, right? Yeah. Well, he's an idiot, right? Yeah. Well, let me tell you what that idiot did. And then they, build it up and do the whole thing. Then there's the kings. These are the guys who want to be in charge, and you can spot these in every group. Who wants to be in charge? Who wants to be in control? For these guys, it's not about being in charge, it's about being in control, because the fear holds them hostage so much that any kind of experience that I don't have full control over is very, very, can be very detrimental, very much a struggle. These make bad family members, because they tend to be mean to the people closest to them. They say that the hardest place to work this program is in the home. And when you have that kind of an ego and you need to be in control so much, there's a perception in the home, particularly with males, that I'm in charge. It's my house. I was corrected not long ago. I made that statement. I said, this is my house. And my wife and son reminded me that they live there too. And by the way, okay. But I mean, that nastiness, it can get to the nth degree, and you start to feel, I was feeling pretty good about myself. I was, everything was coming together. I'm an important guy. Just ask me. And you know, these are the guys at work, they're tough, these are very hard people to work with because they want to be in control. They want to be in charge. These are the guys in a meeting, when you start to have a conversation, they dominate the conversation, or when you make a comment, they override you, or they belittle you. The act of using, they're very ashamed of, because they have the need to be in control and acknowledged and respected, and they view using as a weakness. And so these are the guys that really try to hide it quite a bit, because, you know, if I stop drinking, I admit I'm a loser. You know, they have that kind of view of it. There's the princess. These are the you know, center of attention. You know, they've got to be the center of attention at all times, and they really struggle if other people start to get attention. You know, literally will like push them out of the way. You see it in exaggerated senses sometimes in movies and things where that goes on. But these are takers. These guys, there's no give. You know, these people aren't giving anything away. It's what's in it for me. What can I get? And these are folks, gals in particular. You know, that they assume that your worship of them is justified, if that makes sense. There's the perfectionist, and these people drive. You know, I thought these people drove me crazy till I realized I was one of them. You know, that like I like everything just so, and everything's got to be just so, and if everything isn't just so, they're always. I'm always upset with myself. You know, these people get very upset with themselves that things aren't just right. You know, and if any little thing goes out of the way, it ruins everything. Everything is spoiled, and when you first meet these guys, they seem like they have their act together. And then you stick around with them long enough and you want to shoot them because they're unbearable in terms of, you know, you think, wow, that's impressive. They're disciplined, they got their act together. You know, it's, time goes on, it's usually not that way. These guys also, part of the reason that folks are perfectionists is they're insecure. Certainly true for me. My own insecurities drive me to perform. My own insecurities drive me to be big. When you have this to the nth degree, that these people don't feel worthy because they have expectations that are out of whack. We know that in recovery, you know, our expectations are the root of most of our, you know, we have these false expectations of others and false expectations of ourselves. These people in the king baby syndrome, these perfectionists, which tend to be just as much alcoholics and addicts as it is family members, tends to be more prevalent in family members because it's much more polished. But these folks usually have just impossible standards. You know, stretch goals is what they call it in business sometimes. You have a goal and you just can never quite get to it. The brass ring is just always right there. And so you're never managing for reality, you're managing for fantasy. You know, that, well, we could really do this if we just tried, or if the guys in Department A just worked a little harder, they'd be all right. Because this is what perfect looks like. So I used to have a sign on my office that said, perfection's the goal, progress will be tolerated, you know. And, you know, because we're as long as you're moving forward, we should be okay. But these guys can't do that. They can't accept that. Then there's the clinging vine, you know, and these are the folks who seem to get everybody to do something for them. Like they have an innate ability not to get things done themselves. Everybody else does it. You know, some of it is because they have the woe is me, but that, you know, they tend to be, they're not mean, but they're helpless. They play the kind of the helpless role, and I just can't seem to function, and you know, always looking for, you know, looking for favors, looking for compliments. You know, they'll seek out, you know, can you be nice to me, and they're very polite about it until you don't give it to them, and then they get pretty nasty. And so these are the Jekyll Hyde type folks that will pop up. And then we have my favorite, the little devil. You know, that there's that message that tells us we're always right and everybody else is always wrong. Now, I often talk to people, if you get involved in dialogue with a chemically dependent person in active addiction, you will never win, because you will attempt to discuss this with them in a rational way, and chemically dependent people don't respond in rational ways. And so you get confused, and inevitably you get, the need is to be in control, which has the appearance of always be right. You'll hear sometimes you want to be right or you want to be happy. Well, I'm happiest when I'm right. So I would prefer to have that go. But it's so important to stay in control that it doesn't matter what I'll lose. And the fact that the chemically dependent person's reality is so distorted, when they have that conversation with you, what happens is they really believe they're right, and the fear of being out of control is so strong that they will take losing all of these other things in order not to be out of control, or not to have the self-perception of being out of control. And so they're very, what do we call reptilian? They operate in a reptilian brain. Very basic needs are all that need to be met. So they're very kind of infantile and immature in the behavior. And the way that we get things done is we manipulate others to do them for us. And that's that whole syndrome. So when we talk about the syndrome, that cluster of personality traits, that these are the things that chemically dependent and codependent people do in order to feel safe, that sense of feeling okay. When we look at it as it applies to codependency, it's not so much a personality problem that you get as a result of alcohol or drugs. It's more of what we call an environmentally influenced, that the environment that you live in really kind of brings this out. And so what happens is you tend to be, the world you live in dictates how you survive. Does that make sense? And what you have to do. And, so the personality itself, the use itself is really just a response to the inability to cope. Because in terms of the king baby syndrome, because I don't have the skill set to be able to deal with life on life's terms, I've got to assume one of these roles that we just talked about. Once you assume one of those roles to survive, the only way that you can deal with reality when it pops up every now and then, the brain's unable to do that. People are forced to use. If using has become an option, it's a force to do that. So these people with these personality traits tend to get into that pretty quickly. So what are some characteristics in addition to that, if you think you have it or somebody you know? Authority figures, they're always feeling like they're getting the short end of the stick, and they often get angry, and they try and rally the troops. It ain't fair, we're getting screwed. Every time a new policy comes out, they look for what's wrong instead of for what's right. They become so focused on approval that they will adapt and change based on the group or based on the focus. They'll tend to be go in that route, so that they you'll often see say it's a high school, you can hang around with the jocks, you can hang around with that. When I was a kid, there were juicers and heads, and juicers were the guys that drank, and the heads were the guys who used drugs. And then there were the jocks, and then there were the princesses. And so what I would adapt to each population when I was around them. You adapt to those personality traits to a point where you're so busy adapting to the multiple worlds that you are involved in, that you lose your sense of self. There's no sense of self going on. Any kind of feedback is viewed as criticism and brings out anger. Because they don't have coping skills and communication skills, there's a great article, if you ever want to read it, from an old business one from the Harvard Business Review. It talks about why smart people can't learn. And the idea behind it is what they call single loop. That really smart people really struggle with getting feedback because they don't see it as feedback, because they're supposed to be so smart and we're supposed to be experts at what we do, that anybody who says, hey, maybe if we do this different, takes that as a criticism on my skill set or my ability to do something. And so that's true for, as you, what we do is you roll down is, how do you get into what they call double loop learning, where you understand that, then what can I do better to help me? These guys can't understand that. They just can't do that. These are also folks you'll see that are great 30-yard dash guys in a 100-yard race. They come out of the blocks, they look great, they're doing fine, and then like when responsibility time shows up, these guys are nowhere to be found. And very common trait in chemically dependent, codependent folks. They have, most of what they do, these are the guys that get involved in activities and within a very short period of time take it to the extreme. I'm going to go hiking, and the next thing you know, they want to climb Mount Everest. They start doing woodworking, and the next thing you know, they have an entire wood shop in the basement. Those kinds of things. They just go to the extreme. I'm going to fish, and the next thing you know, they've got, all the gear and everything set up and all the different stuff. I'm going to learn how to cook, and they've got all the cookbooks and all the other things that are going on. But it's very much addictive personality. And then when they engage in exercise is another one. They get into exercise and they just become totally obsessed with it. Runners. I run and do triathlons and stuff. I see a lot of these people. They get in and they get so extreme with it that they get hurt, and then physically they can't participate anymore. They tend to be what we call self-rejecting and self-alienating. That you can't look in the mirror. I don't like who I become. I don't like what I've become. I don't know what to do about it, so I'm just going to stay away from me. And that's a tall order. It's a hard thing to do. It's very common, but it's a very hard thing to do. So the only way you can distance yourself from yourself is to become somebody else. To assume another thing or to simply use to such an extent that you can't see yourself, if that makes sense. And these are the folks that you can never satisfy, never happy. They find fault with everything. These are the yeah, but guys. That's a good thing, but, what about this, what about that? And what happens is the frustration comes because they can't handle it. Anger becomes the presenting emotion. And so these guys come across as very angry. And there's a great, we do a great lecture on signs of hidden anger in treatment, and talks about all the body language and everything. It's a riot because by the end of the lecture, everybody is sitting with their feet flat on the floor and their hands on and looking you right in the eye because nobody wants to be perceived as angry, But body language has a lot to do that. So knowing what your anger looks like, certainly moving forward, is very very important. And this is textbook stuff. I mean, this is what everybody looks like. So if you see this, the good news is you got it. The bad news is you got it. But there is hope, and there's a way to kind of move forward. These are, the other one is the king baby is the person that even in a crowded room they're all by themselves. The loneliness is extreme, and that there's a sense of unworthiness, and so they're all, even though you're in a crowd, even though you're surrounded by people, you're all by yourself. They complain about everything. They blame others for everything that's going on. I wouldn't be like this if you weren't such a bitch. You whatever it might be. If you had my job, you'd drink too. Everybody's got an excuse. I'm under pressure. It's just not working. And then, of course, I don't fit in. I'm the square peg. It's the round hole. Nobody appreciates what I do. Nobody appreciates my uniqueness, and therefore it's their fault, not mine. So there's a lack of responsibility. And they tend to be that everybody's out for themselves. It's a very selfish world, and people will screw you at every opportunity, and you got to be careful. So you're always on guard. So that whole conspiracy theory world makes sense to them. These guys are very prone for that kind of stuff because they really think that everybody's out to get you. They don't believe in the goodness of folks because they don't see the goodness in themselves. Sad. There's also there's an extreme view of everything is all or nothing, life or death, you know, like that if we don't get this done, the whole world's going to fall apart. You know, that they just they take things to extremes. And they live in what we call a must world. This must happen. This must be this way. This must be that way. These are folks who are very black and white. They say most of the world is in gray, and that your ability as a person, your ability as a manager, your ability as a human being to manage the ambiguity in your life, the gray area, is really your key to success. And most of us live in the gray area. You know, we'd like to have everything very structured. When my son went into the Marines, he was there for 13 weeks. He said it was perfect because everything was 45 minutes, not 46, not 44. It was 45 minutes. It was the only time in his life where everything was just, perfectly timed, and everything was just right, and that there was no, there was no ambiguity. You knew exactly where you were supposed to go. Where they painted feet on the ground for you, so you knew where to stand and how to put your feet. You know, there was everything was done. There was no mystery. The reality, though, for most people is that life is mystery. So they tend to judge things in a very black and white way because the fear will hold them hostage. And when you have the spiritual sickness and you have the cost and the guilt and the shame that comes with addiction, much of your perception of what's going to happen next is based on what's happened before. So there's a strong tendency to live in the past. And for chemically dependent people and codependent people, there's usually a lot of trauma and a lot of pain and a lot of sadness there. And so it's very hard to be focused. It's very hard to feel as if I've got the ability to see things as positive, because I'm very fearful about the future, because I believe the future is going to be a replay of the past. Use the example we used before. If we asked you to stand up, tell us your deep, dark secret, what's going to happen? All we're going to see is the back of your head running down the hill, because the perception is you were going to judge me as harshly as I've judged myself, and it's going to be a very painful outcome. Some other things are that, the fear of abandonment, no question about that. Strong fear of failure and fear of rejection. You know, one of the common things that we talk about is the fear of rejection should self-revelation occur. That if I tell you about myself, you will reject me. If you know all there is to know about me, you will reject me. So go back to what we talked about, some of these profiles. I have to wear the false face. I have to pretend I'm something different. I have to pretend I'm in control. And they say an alcoholic and an addict's first addiction and a family member's first addiction is to fantasy. We like to live in the pretend world. You know, the woulda, shoulda, couldas. There's a great saying in rational model therapy, don't should on yourself today. You know, we have this belief that other people are having a better life than I am. You know, when I went to Oscars, all the fun was happening at O'Toole's, and so I'd run down to O'Toole's. When I got to O'Toole's, I'd figure out they must be back at Scanlon's, and I'd run back to Scanlon's. You know, I was always convinced that the good stuff was happening somewhere else. I was also convinced that, like, the secret to life was given to everybody in 4th grade when I was out with the chicken pox, and whatever you do, don't tell Knowlesy. You know, like, they got it and I didn't. You know, there was that sense of rejection or failure, that I just didn't know how to get it going. And a lot of people fall into that. It's a very common thing. And and with that comes that fear of abandonment, that you're going to be alone. You know, it's one thing to be lonely, it's another thing to be alone. And most of us have a strong fear of being alone. So what happens is you have to go for, when your world, when you can't live in the ambiguity, you have to start to look for what they call tangible things to be able to judge success on. So it becomes an obsession with material goods. There becomes an obsession with money. That's why financial insecurity for chemically independent people, it's one of the promises we get when it comes back. If you go back to the early promises, it says, fear of financial insecurity will leave us, and we'll intuitively know how to handle situations that used to baffle us. The financial insecurity is that money is stability. It's very black and white. You have $1, there's 100 pennies. You know, it's 4 quarters. It's very clear. It's very concrete. And so the obsession becomes, these things represent me. These things represent who I am. These things give me stability. There's there's a tendency to have, to always be planning for the aha moment and the big plans. One of the things you'll see oftentimes in early recovery is people will come up with a plan and they'll get frustrated 95% of the way through it. So rather than give it a shot and see what they can improve, they go back and redo the plan. And they spend so much time planning, nothing gets done. You know, the woulda, shoulda, couldas. I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do that, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do that. And then I spend so much time woulda, shoulda, couldaing it that nothing happens. I don't get involved. And because fear is such a prevalent thing, any illness in themselves and others is incredibly frightening. And people go right to, you know, I have a little bit of a headache, must be cancer. I wonder what I'll wear when I'm in the casket. You know, that it goes to the nth degree that the fear is just so prevalent that folks do that, and very, very common with folks. I wonder who'll smile. Who, you know, who's going to tell the joke? You know, when Frank comes by, I wonder if he'll remember what a good guy I was. You know, he'll appreciate that. You know, that people really kind of take those things to the nth degree. They tend to be very charming of people in power, and nasty to people who are not. And so they figure out what their thing is in the world. In the workplace, you see these guys, they stand out like a sore thumb. You know, they're the, what we call the Eddie Haskells of the world, if you're old enough to remember that term, but these are the eternal suck-ups, and then as soon as that person walks away, they're nasty to the other folks in the room. There's a tendency to think that rules and laws are for others. My sister-in-law once identified this very well. She said, you know, the Knowles boys aren't lawbreakers, they're rule breakers. And I thought, wow, that's a interesting way of putting it. My brother and I, who were both recovering, she I'm guessing was referring to us. And but yeah, that maybe the rules don't always apply to me the way they do somebody else. So like, there's a no parking here to corner. Well, maybe that's for Kingsley. That's not for John. You know. So they always kind of push the limits. I'll pull into the handicap spot or whatever it might be. But the rules of the rest of the world maybe aren't the rules for me. You come at 8 o'clock, I'll punch in at 8:05 if I can. You know. And that real excitement junkies, they love drama, chaos, you know, love being around the excitement. They don't always like being the focus of excitement, or they don't like being the focus of the drama and the chaos, but they love being around it. You know, these are the guys who love walking around the outside of the circle, watching all that stuff, because there's an energy and a high you get from all of that chaos, all that drama, all that excitement. And because what we call emotional numbness, that what you call a flat affect, your affect, your presenting behavior, your presenting emotion, becomes very, what they call stunted and distorted, because you've been holding on to your emotions and suppressing your emotions for so long because of the fear of rejection should self-revelation occur, that you literally experience emotional numbness. And you lose touch with your feelings, so that even when something happens that should create some type of an emotional response, the inability to be in touch with that part of your being, you're so spiritually and emotionally sick that I'm unable to experience that. Very sad, sad part. So important to it's important to remember that if you have these defects of character or these character traits, or if you can identify with a number of these things, it doesn't mean good or bad. It's not right or wrong. It's what the addiction is. You know, addiction is all about, you know, the neurological, you know, we often say I have a severe neurotoxicity brought on by my chronic and ongoing exposure to beverage, alcohol, and mood and mind altering substances, which disallows me to be in touch with my emotions and display a flat affect. Which sounds pretty good, you know. It's that's the $10 answer for I'm whacked and I don't know how to talk to people, and I wouldn't know a feeling if it slapped me in the face, you know. And but it just means that you know, if you identify these symptoms in yourself and the people closest to you, Okay, that means you're in the right place. You know, if you look like a duck, you walk like a duck, you raise your hackles like a duck, and you hang around with other ducks, there's a good chance you're a duck. If you have these key behaviors, there's a good chance that there's chemical dependency present somewhere. And if you've acknowledged that, then we're in good business, you know. If you don't acknowledge that, we go back to what we talked about. That just reinforces the speed of which an individual will relapse, because the false perceptions take hold and all the other things. Now, we talked earlier about narcissism, and a lot of people, have a hard time seeing the difference between that, you know. And so, essentially when we talk about, there are a lot of things about a narcissistic personality disorder and a king baby syndrome. And, when a baby is young and they want something, if a baby is hungry, what do? They cry and they scream, and somebody responds, because that's all they know. And we condition them to do that. So that allows them to survive. A narcissist, is somebody who doesn't see anything outside themselves. They love themselves first, and they don't love you second. There is no second or third. It's everything revolves around me. Everything is where I should be. It's if you're using mood and mind-altering substances, you can't begin to identify any of these personality disorders, because of the way that the way addiction clouds the ability to see how are people acting, how are they behaving, how are they demonstrating this, and it's very dangerous to label somebody that way, because then what happens is it allows you not to have to address other things, and the environmental issues and the psychosocial issues and the things you have to do from a recovery standpoint don't have to happen. But narcissistic personality disorder is a very much an overused term in chemical dependency, and that's as much as we'll spend on that, right? So what does this stuff do? What is the vicious cycle that this stuff goes? What a king baby syndrome is that it's the adoption of a defense system and a bunch of these characteristics that allows the person to feel that false sense of security. And unfortunately, because it clouds so much of reality, I mean, what is addiction? Addiction is the distortion of perception, and distortion of perception into reality. So what it does is it just exacerbates that, and it just speeds up the process towards somebody really hitting their bottom. And the in your mind, they talk about the ego. What is the ego? The ego is really that self-centered, selfish focus that goes on, and if your ego has to be fed all the time with excitement and praise and short-term gratification, good chance you're going to end up in trouble. The other thing that is most chemically dependent people and codependent people is that usually by the time addiction comes, the spiritual sickness is all about the loss of values and morals. That we all have an inherent sense of right and wrong. We all have morals and values that are instilled upon us depending on the world that we live in. I'm the youngest of 6 kids in an Irish Catholic family, middle-class kid. There were certain values that my family had. What happens here stays here. Don't tell anybody else your business. Big boys don't cry. If you can't win, don't play. People will respect you if they fear you. There were lots of different messages that we got. I had wonderful parents that were loving, caring people, but there were some pretty, if I came home crying because Johnny called me a jerk down the street, my father sent my brother Kevin down the street to beat up Johnny. That's how we handled that stuff. We didn't talk about our feelings. We didn't talk about things. But there were certain values, work hard, play hard, take care of the people you love. Family was everything. So there were, when you started to violate those, like there are certain rules in my home, and there are certain rules in my workplace. It's a good chance I don't walk around in the workplace in my underwear and ask one of my coworkers to pull my finger. I might do that at home with my kids, that depending on the world you live in, there are certain values and morals. And what happens in addiction is I violate that sense of right and wrong. I violate those morals and values. And the more I do that, the less conscious I have, and my value system has become so distorted that the spiritual sickness takes hold, and then that's when everything just really takes off. And so it's the restoration of values, and it's the restoration of being the person I'm capable of being, you know, and one of the struggles is, do I really want to be that guy? You know, because some of these defects of character, I often say, you know, the 7 deadly sins, some days it's fun being a greedy, lustful sloth. Not so sure I want to give that up all the time. But the reality is it's never served me well. So maybe I need to take a look at that. So the vicious cycle that we do is that when you have this this need to be the center of attention, this need to be the king, this need to be the princess, the perfect person to be in control all the time, you experience incredible highs and lows. It's exhausting to continue this type of a personality and this type of thing, because you have the rush, and then you have the, so it's kind of like the crash craving cycle of withdrawal. You know, that you crash and you feel horrible, and then you crave, and then you get high, and then the excitement comes up, and so it just keeps going round and round and round and round. And then, you know, the danger for us in early recovery is I keep looking for that. What's my next thing? You know, what gives me that? Is it work? Is it exercise? You know, is it women? Is it gambling? Is it, you know, what could it be? There's lots of things out there that get focused. So when you put that kind of selfishness, self-centered behavior together with mood and mind-altering substances, a false sense of security takes hold, and then what happens is that provides the balance, and that provides the peaks and valleys get straightened out. Why do people use? You know, I use for the feeling, and so once they get that, that feeling just kind of that just level tone is what folks seek. And what we know is that people start by feeling not so good. I use and I feel okay, and eventually I feel horrible, and I use not to feel so bad. And so the continuum is never consistent. So, you know, we talk about years ago there was a book, The Child Within. You know, we all have this inner child and all this other stuff, and you can really kind of get into that to a lot of different ways. But, you know, for most of us, it's those early compromises in our sense of right and wrong, and those value compromises that drive a lot of the negative messages that we get later in life. Your ability to begin to identify those things is really going to be the key moving forward, or they will continue to drive your behavior and your interaction and your relationships. And so if you fail to do that, you just continue to look for things outside yourself. And so there's never a great sense of self. And that king baby, the queen, the selfishness and self-centeredness, one would think, because self is in it so much, but really what it does is it separates you from who you are, the person, that self-assessment, that ability to look in the mirror and know who you are. So when you have that, what happens then is you have that, individuals will experience that kind of conflict, you know. I'm scared, but I want to be in control. You know, I don't know what to do, but I want to be perfect. And so there's a clash back and forth. We talked about always making a plan, not having it. We look for short-term solutions. Essentially what that means is we're looking for the immediate effect. I want to feel good now, you know. When I went out to get high, I didn't want to wait 4 hours. You know, I wanted to drink 7 shots and then have a beer. You know, I wanted the buzz and then go. You know, it was the long-term solution was not working. When you have that frightened child within, that's, you know, you have no self-worth. A lot of that stuff is not there. So, assuming these roles as a king baby or a queen baby, that's what substitutes from picking up the skill sets. Some of you guys may be familiar with the term sick and tired of being sick and tired. If you engage in this king baby, this selfish, self-centered lifestyle, eventually you just get exhausted because everything, it takes a lot of effort to assume one of these roles. It also, you have a tendency to go to the extreme negative. So the rage, the fear, all that stuff almost becomes present all the time when you get to the end. And it really is exhausting. It's like your brain is sore. Your hair is gonna fall out, and your lack of skill sets to be able to cope with life on life's terms or to deal with stress becomes less and less. As that becomes less and less, it becomes more and more frightening, and it's that vicious cycle. It just keeps going around and around and around, and you feel so vulnerable. And so what happens is, you have to admit defeat. You have to face reality. And, we have to move to the next, the glass is half full. It's not always half empty. And, this is where the unacceptable becomes unacceptable to us and to others. Why do people use? Because we accept unacceptable behavior in ourselves and others. People say, John, why did you use? I said, because I could. Because my unacceptable behavior was acceptable to others. And it was acceptable to me. When you admit defeat, what are you admitting? And this is the key here. In the king baby syndrome, I can't fathom this, but what you're doing is you're saying the unacceptable lifestyle I had, the unacceptable things I was doing are unacceptable. I'm not going to accept them anymore. I'm not going to tolerate the intolerable. And then we make a decision to change. Simple. And I get out of the I world and I get into the we world. If you find yourself making a lot of I statements, talking about yourself and talking about that, you're missing what recovery starts to talk about is genuine humility, which is, and for those of you that know humility or know what is humility? Humility is the acceptance of reality. And the acceptance of the reality of my life now and what's happened and where I'm at and what I'm capable of is what I have to work on. If you get involved in a 12-step program, you see this as or any kind of these other programs, you begin to understand that, hey, if I do the smart recovery stuff, I might get to the solution. If I do this 12 steps, I might get to the solution. If I go to therapy, I might get to the solution. And that ultimately, the goal is always to find something outside of yourself to allow you to feel better about who you are. We call this a higher power. Not a religious sense, but from a higher power sense. And so what happens is once you face reality, what has to happen? Well, you got to focus on forgiveness. And you can't forgive others until you forgive yourself. And part of that is, what are your assets? What are the things you have to do? When we start to do a 4-step, that's one of the things we talk about. Look at the good things about yourself. What are your gratitude? Cease to be grateful, cease to be sober. What do you have to be grateful for? What does today offer you? Are you able to see all the good things? Are you judging yourself? Are you judging others? You need to get out of that. Make yourself available for good things to happen, and they will. And that's the key. That when we get to that point of forgiveness, we're at that point of genuine humility, and that's when this whole recovery thing starts to take place. And I realize that the true joy in life is to be of service to others. That my own selfishness and self-centeredness has stopped me from being able to see the ability to find joy in assisting others and being a part of what they do. That ends our chat here for tonight, talking about the whole king baby syndrome and what it is. Hopefully some of these things you were able to identify with some of these characteristics and traits. The important part, though, is that if you have these things going on, guess what? They're all treatable. Chemical dependency is one of the most highly treatable diseases you can have from a chronic standpoint. We have great success rates. People say all the time, John, what's your success rate? So it's 100% if you do what we tell you. And it's one of those few things where that, the variables are there. If you don't use every day, you don't drink, you won't get drunk. I remember a guy said that to me early on. I said, what's the secret? He said, you really want to know the secret? I said, yeah. Tell me the secret. He says, if you don't drink, you don't get drunk. I said, well, I could have said that. He said, well, okay, you're learning. You know, but that's the reality is that there are certain things, if you do certain things, you will get certain results, you know. If I don't drink, then I make if I'm not using, if you remember early on, we talked about it's so hard to see if you have a mental illness or if you have a personality, so there's something going on, you can't see that till you remove the addictive substance. That's the physical. You get better. We get sick spiritually, emotionally, mentally, physically. We get better physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. Most of us get physically better, mentally better, and you know, we can think straight. We don't have the runs every day, and everything's okay. Therefore, I must be all right. And I never developed the emotional and the spiritual. And that's what we're talking about, this king baby stuff. Forgive yourself, make yourself available for good things to happen. Allow yourself to experience life on life's terms. You know, embrace the good, embrace the joy and the pain, and life will improve. I thank you all for joining us here in the last 4 weeks, and it's been a real pleasure, and it's been exciting. And for those of you guys who came to listen each week, I really thank you. It's been inspiring for me. And again, if you have any questions or concerns, Kingsley Schwartz at Brookdale.com, J. Knowles at Brookdale.com. Certainly, we have an 800 number you're welcome to look up if you'd like copies of the slides, or if you'd like to discuss them further. Please don't hesitate to email or give me a call. Would love to hear from you. And I guess that does it for us, right?
Thank you.